name is William Merrill. I'm a structural engineer with Rebuild Northwest Florida, and I'm here today to talk about opening protection. When I say opening protection, what I'm referring to is protecting your windows and doors from windborne debris, the kind of stuff and junk that flies around during a hurricane. Most people, when they think of opening protection, they think of shutters, but there's some other alternatives such as impact glass. One of the misconceptions about shutters are that they protect just the window that's behind them. That's not exactly true. Although they do protect that window, their need and their importance is much greater. And I can probably sum it up with this analogy, which you're probably familiar with. Say it's a nice spring day, the wind's a little gentle breeze is outside, you decided to open up your back door and let some of that nice air back into your house. Say you're sitting on your kitchen table reading the newspaper and the front door rings. You walk to the front door, in the absolute second that you crack it open, guess what happens? Your back door slams shut, papers fly everywhere, and you kind of scratch your head and say, well, what in the world just happened? And a lot of people would say that the wind blew the back door shut. That's somewhat true, but it isn't that the air molecules passed through your house, pushed on that door. What actually happened was that the gentle breeze that was outside created a difference in pressure. It put a higher pressure on the front of your house and a lower pressure on the back of your house. When you cracked that front door, the pressure tried to equalize very rapidly, and it basically pushed the door open, the high pressure on one side and the low pressure on that other sucked it closed. When you consider that wind pressure is exponential with wind speed, in other words, every time you double the wind speed, you quadruple the wind pressure, you can see the enormous forces that a hurricane type winds will put on a house. You know, had this example happened during a hurricane, the door wouldn't have just slammed loudly, it would have probably ripped from its hinges and been in your neighbor's pool. So just because there's a small effect in one area of the house, it can cause a large effect in another. And that's the real purpose of shutters. You protect that glass, you protect those doors from being penetrated by debris, opening up what engineers call the building envelope, and the damage may occur totally on the other side of the house. And a lot of people may look at a damaged house and look at just the damaged area and say, ooh, this is what failed, it was these nailing, this roof deck. Well, the actual failure occurred when a limb on the total other side of the house breached the envelope by piercing a window. And that's the real advantage and real importance to shutters, and that's why they're probably the most basic thing we can do to protect our homes. I'm sure you're familiar with what I have here. After all, plywood is the most basic and historically what people think of when they think of shuttering their home. It's what runs out of the store, the hardware store, the day before the storm, and primarily that's because it's a do-it-yourself application, and it's fairly economical when compared to other options. The problem with plywood is that in order to install it correctly, it is very difficult. A lot of people install it incorrectly in that they put it over the opening. They may drill some sheetrock screws through the plywood and into their house or into the window or door frame. And none of those methods meet code, and none of them really provide the level of protection you want in a large hurricane. To do it right, to do it to code, the plywood has to be pre-drilled with a precise spacing based on the span. Pins, just like the shutter pins that we'll see on steel and other types, they are drilled through the brick and into the structural members of your house, or through the wood siding and into the structural framing. Those all have to be installed, and the plywood placed over those, and the wing nuts latched down just like steel panels. So from an installation standpoint, there isn't really a lot of savings if you do it to code. Of course, there's plenty of non-code compliant methods. They make little clips that you can put on that slide in, or who knows? Just whatever's in the garage, the homeowner will drill those screws and put it in the wall. But again, that does not provide the level of protection that's really necessary. We discourage plywood at rebuild for several reasons. One, we have to make sure everything is done to code and compliant with the local building department. The second reason is plywood is very difficult to deploy. It's heavy. It's not usually even a smaller piece this size is not really a one-person job. It's very difficult from a ladder. And if you've ever tried to place it, even a gentle breeze, these large panels push it around, and it can be dangerous. If you're standing on a ladder and a gentle breeze comes up and the plywood's oriented a certain way, it can push you right off of it. Some of the other problems with plywood is it doesn't stack real neatly. You have different size openings and they don't stack in real compact like steel panels do, and take up a lot of room. And some other problems, they're sensitive to moisture and rot, and there's nothing worse than the day before a storm you find out half your panels are rotted or molded, and then you're back at the hardware store with all the other crazies trying to get the last bits of plywood. It can be done code compliant. It's a good option, but we recommend something more along the lines of steel panels or some of the other things I'm going to show you for the reasons I discussed. And just because you may save a little bit at the initial purchase doesn't mean it's going to be economical for the long haul. Rebuild is probably best known for steel shutters. A large percentage of our budget goes towards steel shutters, and that's probably because they're the base product that we offer. In other words, a homeowner would get 75% credit for steel shutters. If they wanted to do something more expensive, like some of the options I'm going to show you, they would have to pay the 100% of the difference. They're Florida product approved. Steel shutters are very strong. They are fairly easy to deploy compared to, say, plywood. They're paneled out, and the panels are actually fairly light, and they go over male pins that are installed into the frame of the home. Steel shutters stack very nice. They are pretty maintenance free. The steel pins have to be lubricated every now and then, but these steel shutters can last 50 plus years if they're stacked fairly dry. A lot of them are galvanized, and there's just not a lot that can go wrong with them. Some of the downfalls with them is it can be a lot of labor to install them, carrying each one of those panels and tightening them down. They're very sharp, especially the edges and the little holes. It just has to do with the way they were manufactured. These steel panels that we install are Florida product approved, and they have a stamp on them. Other shutters you'll see out there have stamps such as Miami-Dade or the Florida product approval or large missile impact, and that's a code requirement for steel panel shutters. If you ever come across any that don't have stamp, be concerned. They're probably not impact rated. Fabric shutters are relatively new to the market, and they gain popularity fairly quick. One reason is they're flexible. They can go around curved openings. They're light, no sharp edges. One person can basically carry one of these panels up a ladder and cover a large window in a short amount of time. Or steel panels, you have to carry each panel individually. No sharp edges. Installation is very similar to steel panels in that pins are fastened into the structural members of the house. These grommets actually fasten over these pins, and so another advantage that these have is they do let some light into the house. Probably one of the disadvantages, are a little bit more expensive than steel panels, but the other main disadvantage is They don't offer quite the protection from the window breaking behind them. They give just a little bit. The product is meant to balloon into that opening and protect the envelope of the structure, but the window itself may be a little more susceptible to damage. If you can see right here, this is called a female pin. The other pins I've shown you have been male. In other words, they protrude out from the structure an inch or so. And this is an upgrade option. They run about 50 cents a piece. And part of the reason the cost is it's two different diameter drills, plus you have to put this plastic cap on, and the little pin itself is a little more expensive. The main advantage is that they're flush with the wall. Some people don't notice them as much, but if you have areas of high traffic or kids, maybe you don't, maybe you have a door that opens that could be damaged by a male pin. It's a good option. Basically, there's a plastic cap. The plastic cap is unscrewed. The shutter goes over it, and then there's a threaded pin that would screw into the female side and tighten down. Installation takes a little bit longer than with male pins, but not enough to really make a difference. I don't know if you've ever been in a home that's been fully shuttered with steel panels or or plywood or something that prevents any light from coming in, and it can be a little unnerving, especially for some people, and especially during a storm. If you want to see what's going on outside, maybe you feel a little more secure. These Lexan panels are ideal. They have some advantages over steel in that they are clear. They allow a lot of light in. They're not quite as heavy, and they don't have any sharp edges. The one downfall is that they are quite a bit more expensive than steel panels. What I have here are aptly named accordion shutters, because they accordion out to close. They usually have a latch or some mechanism that allows them to tighten down on the frame. One of the big benefits of many models is that they can be deployed from actually inside a window, shut and latch. And for second story windows or other hard to reach locations, as well as balcony doors that you couldn't actually deploy from the outside. They're a great alternative. Some of the negatives is they're outside in the weather all the time. They're quite expensive when compared to steel panel shutters. And they do require a little more maintenance, more spray to keep them lubricated, and they also sometimes attract wasp nests. This is a Bahama shutter, and if you notice, it is permanently attached with a hinge along the top. To deploy them, screws are loosened on each side. The Bahama shutter is lowered over the opening, and then it's locked into place with this pin. The main advantage to Bahama shutters, aside for a lot of people like the way they look, is that they're just super simple to deploy, just a few seconds on each opening. Some of the negatives are cost. They're very expensive, and they also don't open up all the way to allow full light into windows, so you have to select the openings you want to put them on. This particular Bahama shutter is large missile impact rated with a Florida product approval. And one of the ways you can tell is this web here is very, very stiff. There are a lot of non-Florida product approved, non-large missile rated Bahama shutters out there. And the best way to tell is if this web here is hollow and it's real, real flimsy. If we come across those on a house that we're getting ready to retrofit, we'd actually have to shutter back over that opening and couldn't accept those existing Bahama shutters. I'm going to show you several pictures of roll down shutters. These are on the upper end of shuttering options. Some of them are manually cranked down, others have electric motors, and I've even heard of ones that are tied into the home security system and can be lowered from a cell phone thousands of miles away. They're nice, they're protected up in that housing. The main downfall is they're quite expensive. I would say the most expensive, but certainly the most convenient way to protect the openings is with impact glass. As you can see, this particular model has a little bit of a green tint, but not all of them do. Some other models you can hardly tell by just looking at them. Usually impact windows have double panes. One of the panes is a laminated pane and the other is either tempered, and they also provide a good deal of energy efficiency and sound resistance. The things to look for with impact glass are etchings that state specifically that they're large missile impact rated or that they're laminated. So there is some confusion, and a lot of people think they have impact glass when they're labeled tempered, but tempered is usually non-impact. If we see tempered, we assume it's not an impact glass. There are usually the double pane windows, only one of them are impact and the other one is just tempered or some other type of glass, and the impact pane can either be on the inside or the outside. It doesn't really matter. One of the misconceptions with impact windows is that they get impacted and nothing happens, but a lot of times one of the panes will actually shatter, or the impact pane will crack real bad. Again, it's not to protect that particular window from having to be replaced. It's to protect that entire building envelope. And after the storm, that expensive impact window would have to be replaced. Unless you're going to shutter your home and evacuate, you're going to need an egress option. Going through a garage is ill-advised because, remember, the power may be out and lifting that door can be hard on some people, but it could have been impacted or it could be in a bind just because of the wind. We do not advise using your garage door as your primary egress. Likewise, going through shuttering options such as accordions is ill-advised because they may be in a bind, and it does take time to unlatch and open them, and if it's usually an emergency situation and you just don't have time. What Rebuild does is we provide a steel door if there's a good opening for it, and this steel door is attached to the frame in such a way, and the frame of that door is attached to the house in such a way that it's impact tested and approved. You can see it has a deadbolt, which is also part of the attachment, and they're quite strong, and they're an excellent option for egress. There's some more exotic options. You can get impact glass doors, such as large sliders that have impact glass and are also tested, and you can even take these steel doors and put impact glass in them. The doors have to be stickered and labeled properly according to building code. One thing I would say to look out for is that a lot of times there's doors that are stickered properly, but there's been an aftermarket situation where somebody's cut in non-impact glass, and that's pretty much made the impact rating worthless. We look out for that pretty closely. And one downfall with getting more exotic doors is the lead time. They have to be special manufactured, and it can take a while to get them, and they are quite expensive. I want to talk a minute about non-code compliant shutters, and particularly non-code compliant installation. There are a lot of different types of shutters and storm panels out there. We want to make sure that anything we install in our home is rated for large missile impact. But as importantly, I want to talk about the installation. Shutters are historically been a code plus item. In other words, they're not necessarily required by code up until recently, especially in the Panhandle. We had an exemption, and up until late 2007 it wasn't required of new construction. Now it is. But on older homes, there's not a lot to prohibit you from just going and buying some shutters and putting them up yourself. And the huge danger is that they will not be installed per the engineering requirements on those shutters. We do inspections. We look for certain things, and we look to see if there's a permit, because if there's a permit, we're pretty satisfied that they've been installed right. If there aren't a permit, we go a little bit deeper. We require our contractors to do some investigation. We may pull some bolts out, and there's some telltale signs of non-code compliant installation. Probably one of the biggest misconceptions are that they're attached to brick facade. Brick facade on a home is not considered structural. That's counterintuitive. It looks like solid brick, but the building code doesn't allow us to consider brick as code compliant, and those shutters have to be tied to the actual framing member, the skeleton of the home itself, and not just to the brick, and not to the brick ledge, and certainly not just into the facade. Holes have to be drilled completely through the brick, through the air gap that's in between, and pins actually attached into those into the framing of the home. And I'll show you a few pictures here of some non-code compliance, some bolt lengths that don't meet the requirements, and some of the typical shortcomings of existing shutters we find.
If you see there that second story double window on the gable on either side of it, they're blue shutters. Those are really nice shutters. They're attractive, they're colonial style, they're solid wood, and they probably, if closed and latched properly, would provide a good level of protection. However, with them, they're not necessarily large missile impact rated. They've never been tested. And talking to the homeowner, I believe these were somewhat homemade, and it goes back to the state of Florida's product approval system. For a shutter to truly be effective, it needs to be tested and evaluated and registered with the state as an approved product that is large missile impact rated. This is one we came across on a house with existing shutters. If you can see below the brick ledge, there's a metal track, which is a common installation method for steel and aluminum panel shutters. And if you notice, we actually pulled this bolt out of the house, and it's, a little over 2 inches, not near enough to go through both the brick, the airspace behind it, and penetrate into the wood behind it. We actually ended up retrofitting these shutters by putting longer bolts. But this is quite common. We find a lot of installation, especially those that did not have a permit pulled, with fasteners that simply attach to the brick facade, and it has to go into the structural members of the house. Although this bolt is a good bit longer than the one I just showed you, it's still short. It's only 6 inches. And remember, you've got to go through several inches of brick, several inches of airspace, and embed several inches into the structural frame of the house. You can refer to the engineering for that specific model, but it's still several inches short, believe it or not. This is an installation we commonly find and instantly realize is not compliant. When we see this type of installation, we reshutter. If you notice, that metal track is what holds the panel shutters, and it's actually fastened straight down through the brick ledge. There's no way those bolts could be attached into the structural members of the house.
I'm sure you're familiar with these. These are decorative shutters, sometimes plastic, sometimes wood. These particular ones are plastic, and they have a simulated wood grain, and when they're painted, they're meant to look like old style colonial shutters. They're quite flimsy. They're attached with plastic anchors to the wall and obviously provide no storm protection whatsoever. One reason I wanted to show you these is the typical install is flush against the brick. In order for our storm panels to be attached, these decorative shutters need to be moved out just a few inches so the pins can go in and there's some overlap for the storm panels. The shuttering systems I've shown you today are certainly not the only ones available. Manufacturers are coming up with new devices and new opening protection all the time. At Rebuild, we're currently evaluating a screen-type mesh that goes over certain openings that may be hard to deploy, say gable end vents or some high-up specific areas. And hopefully we'll start to see some of those on some houses in our program in the near future. Some points I want to make about shutter installation. One, to be effective opening protection, they must be large missile impact rated. There's a lot of products on the market that indicate they are shutters, but they're not tested and rated in such a way that I would feel comfortable. The state of Florida requires what's called a large missile impact rating, and there's a specific test performed by engineering testing laboratories and they certify that product is meeting this standard. Florida Product Approval System, and you can look it up online, lists every product approved for use in the state of Florida. It's very important that any shutter system that you put on the house has a Florida Product Approval number. That does a few things. One, it ensures that it is large missile impact rated. It also provides you detailed installation instructions. And that's important because there's a lot of shutters out there that are not installed in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendation. If you don't feel comfortable with the installation instructions, and they can be, they read more like engineering blueprints, hire a licensed professional, a licensed contractor, pull a building permit. All those things help to make sure they're installed correctly, because if they're not, they really aren't doing any good. I want to talk a minute about safety, particularly with deployment. Metal shutters in particular, but all of them, can be a little bit dangerous to install. They have sharp edges. You have to wear gloves. They can slip out of your hand. They can get a little bit slick if they've got dew on them. And someone's working under a ladder and it slips. They can be dangerous. There's a few ways to mitigate. Probably the most important is to start early and go slow. If you start early, you're not worrying about weather and wind effects. You also can go at a pace that you feel comfortable. If you're rushed, you're going to make mistakes. Starting early also has some other benefits. Say you dropped a few wing nuts, it gives you time to go to the store. If you need wasp spray, you can go get some wasp spray. If something isn't fitting just right, you have time to deal with that, or time to trim back those bushes, or borrow the ladder, or help a friend. There's nothing more important with deployment than starting early. One question we get a lot is, when do we remove the shutters after a storm? And my answer is absolutely as soon as you can and when weather permits. Don't be out in the weather, don't be out in the lightning, don't be out in the wind, but get them down when it calms down. There's several reasons. One is most of the panel type shutters, at least, aren't meant for long exposure outside. A few weeks or even a few months every now and then isn't going to kill them, but get them on down and get them dry and safe and secured. The other part of it, and I have heard this, is sometimes these metals are valuable, and there may be some people unscrupulously looking to collect some metal after the storm, though that would be rare. The biggest reasons to get your shutters down as soon after the storm is to open up those egress options. What happens after a storm? There's no power, people are cooking with gas, they are using candles, and it can be a fire hazard. And get those egress options open and available to you and your family after a storm. One closing remark I'd like to make is that all these shuttering type systems require maintenance, particularly those that stay outside all the time, such as accordions, but all of them do. Look at your manufacturer's recommendations, particularly when it comes to lubricant. Simply WD-40 doesn't work on a lot of these because it attracts dirt and grease, and they have specialized lubricants that either come with or they sell separately for all of these shuttering systems. Use those. Follow the manufacturer's guideline. Deploy your shutters from time to time on a nice day just to make sure everything's opening and closing smooth, that everything still fits, and you know what to do when you're ready. Many of the panel shutters come with a map. I know before Hurricane Isaac, we got a lot of calls that people had lost their maps. Make copies, put it in a safe place, because it's going to be incredibly difficult to deploy your panel shutters without a map. It'll get very confusing very quick. My one final note, and probably the most important thing I'd like you to take away from this video, is that if you don't deploy your shutters, they're not going to do any good. Get shutters that you know how to deploy. Deploy them early before a storm and maintain them well. Thank you guys, and if any of y'all have any questions, my email's at the end of this video. Please feel free to email me with anything you have. Thank you.